I'm Steven Salerno, and you're viewing illustrations from some of the many popular fiction and nonfiction picture books I've illustrated. And right after this brief slideshow, I'll be in my studio describing the process and stages involved creating my illustrations. From the initial small thumbnail sketches, the larger rough sketches and storyboards and character studies, to the completed presentation sketches and final illustrations. So don't go away. I'll see you in my studio. Plus, there will be a sneak peek at my next picture book being released later this year. Hi, I'm Steven Salerno. Welcome to my studio. I'm located here in New York City in Manhattan. I've been an illustrator for many years, creating illustrations for magazines and newspapers and publishing and advertising. But I've also illustrated 36 picture books for kids. Later this year, my 36th picture book will be released, and I'm going to be showing you a little sneak peek of that upcoming picture book. But today I'm going to be mainly focused on showing you the stages that I go through to create my illustrations, from the initial tiny thumbnail sketches and then rough sketches and storyboard sketches, the refined finished sketches which are presented to the design team and art director and editor at the publishing house, and then creating the final illustrations. If you'd like an overview of my illustration career and want to see samples from all of the children's books that I've illustrated, please go to stevensalerno.com. Okay, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is show you that upcoming book that I spoke of. Right now I'm going to give you a little sneak peek at my next picture book that's being released later this year in December of 2022. It's a nonfiction picture book. It's going to be released, it is being released by Clarion Books, which is an imprint of Harper Collins. The story is On the Corner of Chocolate Avenue, How Milton Hershey Brought Milk Chocolate to America, written by Tziporah Cohen and illustrated by Steven Salerno. That's me. What you're looking at is not the actual book. The book is in the process of being printed now. I probably will not get my copies of the book until December or January. This is a colored proof printout of the cover from the printer. Anyone that knows publishing knows that the printer has to go through a series of color proofs to make sure they're getting the color reproduction correct. This is the story of Milton Hershey, the young poor boy from Pennsylvania back in the 1800s, who grew up as a teen learning how to create sweets and chocolates and candies. And he created his own candy companies, and the first 3 failed, and then he finally got it right when he created a very successful caramel company. And the success of that company led him to creating the Hershey Chocolate Corporation, which was of course a mega success, and today it's still one of the largest producers of chocolate in the entire world. So I'm not going to be showing you the process I go through to create the illustrations for this book. I'm just going to be showing you some of the completed illustrations from the color proofs that I have from the printer. And then after this little sneak peek of this book, I'm going to be showing you the process of how I create my illustrations from a couple of my other books. Here is a spread from one of the early spreads in the picture book. This is a scene where a wealthy family. This is from the late 1800s. This is a wealthy family. It's out for a stroll, and you can see that they're enjoying some expensive chocolates that they just purchased from this sweet shop here we see on the right-hand side of the spread. And in front of the window is a young boy with bare feet. He's poor. This is Milton Hershey when he was just 8 years old. And he doesn't have the money to purchase these expensive, delicious, sweet treats, so he's looking longingly in the window. And I had mentioned that Milton, as a young man, you know, starting probably at age 19, he created his own candy companies, and he had several of them that failed. He had one that failed in Philadelphia, and he had one that failed in Chicago, and he had one that failed in New York. So he went back to Pennsylvania, and he started all over again. He created another company. He created a caramel company. It started out just as a street pushcart company, Hershey's Caramels, and it became very, very successful. He actually started exporting caramels all around the world. Here's Here's Milton as a young man with his pushcart in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And you can see with since this is a true life fiction story, I create the illustrations in somewhat of a realistic manner, still stylized, but all the elements are accurate to the day. You can see the architecture of the buildings in the background and the style of the pushcart. That's all accurate, researched elements and objects. And at a certain point in his career, Milton Hershey decided he was going to put all his efforts into creating the best milk chocolate for America, and he went through actually years of trying to find the perfect recipe. Here he is, not quite getting it yet. But then around 1900, he and his team of confectioners and scientists and chocolatiers, they eventually came up with the perfect milk chocolate that was just right for his very first milk chocolate bar. And kind of the rest is history. Milton Hershey and his Hershey Chocolate Corporation became so successful. And this illustration I created, this is one of the ones towards the end of the picture book, and this is Milton and his wife at an overlook, the architects and engineers surveying the town that he built, Hershey, Pennsylvania, for his workers. And you can see one of the early Hershey factories in the background. So if you're wondering about the process of how I create these illustrations, just keep watching, because after this little segment on the corner of Chocolate Avenue, I'm then going to go into specific detail about how I create my illustrations. So this is a little sneak peek on the corner of Chocolate Avenue. Again, it'll be out in December of this year, 2022, from Harper Collins Publishers. Harry Hungry is one of the early picture books fiction picture books that I illustrated, and in this instance I also wrote Harry Hungry. It was for Harcourt Children's Books quite a number of years ago now. And you can see, just looking at the cover, that stylization is very simple and graphic and whimsical. There's the end papers. And I'm going to show you the process I go through to create these illustrations. Someone has helped me to get organized here. And here's one of the original, it's gouache and ink and water. This is a gouache and watercolor on paper. And again, you can see the styling is very whimsical and simple and graphic. Harry Hungry is about a story about a young toddler who has an insatiable appetite and essentially eats everything in his path. Here he is devouring the entire contents of the refrigerator. And here's one of the spread illustrations of Harry then progressing from the refrigerator out to the front yard, and he's eating the flowers and the hose, the garden hose, and the mailbox. Again, this is gouache on actually Arches printing paper, I believe. I wanted to show you some of the originals just to give you a little bit of context before I then start showing you all the sketches. Okay. And here's the actual printed manuscript that I print out, and as I'm reading it, over and over and over 100 times, I am immediately creating all of these little tiny doodles as I read, because as I'm reading, I'm getting a flood of ideas about how I am going to possibly create the images for the final illustrations. So all these little thumbnail sketches just come flying out, and I jot them down as quickly as possible. And you can see they're extremely rough and crude. I call them visual shorthand sketches. They're just for myself. No one sees these. The editor doesn't see them. They're just all the behind the scenes guts of beginning to work out what the images may be or may become. And you'll notice that in all of these little sketches, all these little thumbnail sketches, whoops, I lost my place here. You can see that these little horizontal lines and these little scribbles here, these little horizontal scribbles there. As I'm creating these little visual thumbnails, I'm always have in mind trying to figure out where the text is going to go in relationship with the images that I'm creating. You can see all that little rough indications of where the text is going to go. So I will go through many, many little of these very rough thumbnail sketches. And then from all those little rough thumbnail sketches, I begin to formulate a plan for the entire book, and I go into this stage of doing rough like storyboard drawings, where I'm beginning to work out the flow of all the illustrations, how they're going to tell the story. And again, you can see I'm always dropping into place possibly where the text is going to go. I apologize for my poor lighting here. This is really the hard work of creating a children's book, is working out and mapping out what it is that you're going to do. And it's really a process of finding out what's going to work and what's not going to work. For the images that I end up deciding upon to become the illustrations, I've probably rejected, you know, out of every 5 images I've created as thumbnails or rough sketches, only one of them is going to make it through, because it's a editing process where you're figuring out which images, which concepts, which actions are going to best represent and reflect the text. And you can see in these like rough storyboard sketches, I'm starting to get a little more accurate about where the text is going to go. It's my my task to decide upon where the text breaks are, where the page turns are. Did I show this one already? And you can see, going back to the original manuscript, right from the very start, you can see where I'm circling portions. I'm trying to work out where the text breaks are going to be, or where the page turns are. And from these very extreme, rough storyboard sketches, which again, no one sees but myself, I then have progressed to, you'll see these, another storyboard stage where I've really worked out what it is I'm going to create for the illustrations for the book. And the storyboard stage, you can see, is cleaner and more concise, and the images are more resolved. And again, I'm working out where all the text is going to go. This is the beginning of the story where Harry Hungry's stomach is rumbling, and he's hungry, and his mom comes flying in the room. Oh, where is she? Did I miss her? Oh, here she is. You know, she comes flying in with into the room with a snack to appease Harry. And of course, it doesn't work because he just gobbles up everything. But these storyboard sketches, once they've reached this kind of resolved state, I'll scan these, because these are only like maybe 4 by 6 inches. I will scan these into Photoshop and enlarge them up to the actual size that the book is going to be printed at. And I'll refine them a little bit more, and I'll drop in maybe just a little bit of color in Photoshop. And that is because I'm reaching a point where I call them my presentation sketches, where I then show my presentation sketches to the editor and art director and design team at the publishing house, so they can see my intentions for the entire book. And after a week or two of kind of going back and forth with the art director and the editor, we fine-tune them even just a little bit further and get a green light on the presentation sketches, and then I can commence with creating the final illustrations. So while I'm working on all these preliminary rough sketches and storyboarding, at the same time I'm also creating tests, like character studies of the characters that are going to appear in the book, so I can work out how they're going to look. This is just gouache and ink. This is one of my early concepts for Harry. And I'll go through a lot of these studies. Here's one where Harry did not end up looking like this character. His head shape is a little off. But I'll go through all these studies. Again, it's the preliminary work of figuring out exactly how everything is going to look in the final illustrations. All these preliminary studies, they're just pencil and crayon on paper. You get the idea. It's all the behind-the-scenes work, so that once I am ready to create the final illustrations, I can do so knowing that I've mapped everything out ahead of time. And I was mentioning that I submit those presentation sketches to the design team and art director at the publishing house. And this is that presentation sketch that I've presented to the publishing house. And what they do is they'll then take my rough sketches and they drop in the actual text of the book with the font that they're going to use, and the designer has laid it out, and they'll send it back to me. So I'll have this sketch, these rough sketches, the presentation sketches, sent back to me with the text in place. And this is what I'll put on my light table. I'll put this on my light box and then put my watercolor or Strathmore or Arches printing paper on top of that, and then I'll use that as my guide to create the final illustrations. So for example, here's the sketch that I had submitted, and it's very tight and accurate. That's just how I prefer to do it. And then here's, of course, I showed you this already, here's the final gouache and ink painting. You know, every illustrator is different. I create very resolved sketches to present to the publisher. But I'm sure at the other end of the spectrum, there's some illustrators that hate doing sketches, and they'll just do some incredibly rough doodle and then just verbally discuss with the art director and editor what they plan on doing. Okay, that is Harry Hungry, a nonfiction picture book title that came out just last year in 2021. Gizmos, Gadgets, and Guitars, the story of Leo Fender, written by Michael Mahan and illustrated by Steven Salerno, that's me. This is the story of Leo Fender, who was a California kid growing up in the 19-teens and 20s, or rather, in the teens and 20s, and went through the Great Depression as a young adult. And then by the early 1950s, he was a designer and engineer, and he'd created the first slim solid body electric guitars. And so for a book like that, that's a time period story, I have to do I'll probably scour through like 3,000 photographs to pare it down and find the photographs that I need to use as specific reference. I'll narrow it down to maybe 100 photographs to use as reference. And that's a significant amount of time that you don't have to do with a book that I did like Harry Hungry. And so with with Harry Hungry, you can see how simple and graphic and stylized the characters were that I created for that book. But when I started doing nonfiction picture book titles, I decided right from the start that I was going to do the styling much more representationally and more realistic, so that the images that children saw in these books were accurately reflecting what the objects and people and clothing and elements from the period time of the story really did accurately look like. Okay. Should I do that? You can just see from these pages that I'm flipping through that the stylizations of how I create the characters for these books is much different than the simplicity of the characters in Harry Hungry. Well, considering how high gasoline prices are now, you'll enjoy seeing this illustration. This is a gas station in California in the late 1930s, and you'll see that the price of gasoline back then was 19 cents a gallon. But this is Harry. He had lost his job during the Great Depression as an accountant, and he decided to start repairing radios, and he was always interested in electronics, and that was the beginning of him getting involved with designing electric guitar, the early prototypes of electric guitars. But let me go right now into the same process of creating the sketches. So with Gizmos, Gadgets, and Guitars, here's the original manuscript that I printed out. And again, right out of the gate, I'm creating these little tiny thumbnail sketches because as I'm reading, and I immediately am flooded with thoughts as to how I'm going to create the visuals, and I don't want to lose any of those thoughts, so I'll just jump right in and make sure and get them all down, even if they're wrong, which a lot of them end up being wrong, and I find my way to the correct image that's going to work best for the actions being described in the text. And again, you can see I'm also circling text and making notations because I'm working out where the text breaks and page turns are. Creating the final illustrations, painting and drawing the final illustrations, it's not difficult at all. It takes a lot of time, or sometimes it's tedious, but it's not a difficult process. The difficult process is all this behind the scenes work that you're seeing. And again, no one sees this early rough stage but me. Of course, now you're seeing it too. These thumbnails are never shown to the art director or editor or designer at the publishing house yet. It's too rough, it's too undecided at this stage. Let's see. Okay, well, I can go quicker now. And after I've done that thumbnail stage, I then start working out. I would call this my early rough storyboarding stage, where I'm beginning to work out the flow of the possible illustrations for the whole story. Very crude. I know no one has seen these, so I'm not concerned about how these thumbnail sketches look. Again, they're just visual shorthand for myself to get these thoughts down as quickly as possible. But it's kind of interesting how once I create the final illustrations, or get to the point where I'm going to create the final illustrations, it's very interesting that a certain number of these very early ideas are kind of dead on right from the start. For example, is that the one I'm thinking of? Well, you'll see I had this initial idea for a certain segment of the text that I was going to create this scene of a Western swing band, because Leo Fender used to study these Western swing bands in Southern California that were using very crude amplifiers to electrify their acoustic guitars. So here's this little rough sketch very early on, when I'm just barely reading the manuscript, and I'll show you what turned out to be the corresponding. See, this is the book, and here's the glare is bad, I apologize. Let me swing this light out of the way. Here's the corresponding final illustration of these Western swing band acoustic guitar players, and the bass player, and the mandolin, and the slide guitar. And this final illustration started out very early on as this little doodle here. And you'll notice, as I had mentioned with Harry Hungry, that every time I create one of these rough thumbnail sketches, I'm always working out where the text is going to be in relationship with the image. So again, the stage you're looking at here, I call my very, very rough storyboarding. That's funny, I see a big yes I wrote here that I was definitely going to go with this image, but it never ended up being in the book. So again, you know, it's an editing process where you think you're going to be going in one direction and it turns out that you don't because you find a better way. And here's a very early storyboard sketch where it's starting to get worked out a little bit better here. It's Leo studying these jazz musicians. And here's the final corresponding illustration of Leo studying the musicians and how their acoustic instruments are working with these preliminary amplifiers, and they didn't work very well because the acoustic guitars created a lot of feedback when they were electrified. And that was the beginning of how Leo began to think of creating solid body guitars because they would not have feedback. So again, you get the idea with those very rough storyboards, and then from there it progresses to getting more organized about what I'm going to do, and can bring a little bit more detail into some of these larger storyboard sketches. This is just blue crayon. I don't know why I did blue. I probably had a lot of blue pencils laying around that day. There's that scene again with Leo studying the jazz musicians. And I still have not quite worked out that Western swing band scene. And then from these storyboard sketches are like 2 by 3 inches. They're very tiny. And then from there, these are larger, 5 by 7 or so, or yeah, 5 by 7, where I'm becoming more definitive about exactly where the text is going to go and start bringing in a little more detail to the sketch, to the image. And these sketches at this stage, you can see are well conceived, and they're worked out quite well. So at this point now, with this level of storyboard sketch, I will take this sketch, scan it into Photoshop. Here's another one. All these, they're more worked out. Like here's Leo, the sketch of Leo, and he's going to be leaning against the door here. But I'll take these sketches, I'll scan them into Photoshop, bring them up to the full size of the book, refine them a little bit further, and then they become the final presentation sketch that I show to the art director and editor and design team at the publishing house. And do I have those? Yes. Okay, so here's this storyboard sketch that was well worked out. So I enlarge it, refine, and blow it up into Photoshop, refine it a little bit further, and submit it to the publishing house. And here is that corresponding sketch. This is the sketch brought up to the full size, the rough sketch in Photoshop brought up to the full size. And then I just throw in just a little bit of color washes in Photoshop. So this is the presentation sketch that is shown to the publisher. The entire book is shown to the publisher at this level of sketch. This is, again, the final presentation sketch. This is the scene with that Western swing band. And the rough text is dropped into place too. This is the this is the final presentation sketch. And you'll see this character here, this guitar player on the left. This is the sketch. So once the sketch is approved, I'll then take this sketch and I'll put it on my light table and put my good arches paper on top of it. So I did each of these characters individually. So I'll put this character on my light box. Here is the sepia drawing. So there's the sketch of that guitarist on the left. And here is the final drawing that I create with a sepia crayon. This is the final drawing. And I'll do one of these drawings for each of the characters in that scene, the 4 musicians. And then I'll scan these elements into Photoshop and compose them and put them all in position using my presentation sketch as the guide. And then the final illustration, the color is done digitally in Photoshop. And I'm going to show you that process later. And there's a scene in the book where Leo Fender has lost his job in the Great Depression and he's in a jobs line. So here is the final sepia drawing. Let's see if I can get a little closer here. This is like a sepia crayon. And this is one element of one of the scenes in the final illustration where I created this drawing, then I scan it to Photoshop, and then using the presentation sketch as a guide, I put all the elements in position, and then I create the final color digitally in Photoshop. Here's another one of these drawings. This is Leo when he was accountant. So I was an accountant. This is an example of the reference that I have to find. So for example, I have to find reference for the exact kind of phone used during that year, or the kind of adding machine an accountant would use, or the kind of visor that they wore. So that's, where's my book here? That drawing I showed you of the unemployment line. Here's the final illustration in the book. So you can see that there's those characters again in the background. And I added Leo in the front. And all this color was done in Photoshop. Okay, so in my presentation I showed you the process that I go through creating the illustrations for Harry Hungry, my fiction picture book, and then I showed you the same stages and process I go through creating the illustrations for a nonfiction picture book that I illustrated, Gizmos, Gadgets, and Guitars. And here's the cover of the book again, showing here on the screen now. And I'm just going to review again the process that I go through so you can see it in a linear fashion. Here's the cover, the story of Leo Fender. I'm going to move this out of the way here. Oops. And let's bring this one up here. This, I had showed you that when I get the manuscript, I start doodling immediately right into the manuscript, what I call sort of like visual shorthand sketches. And I wanted to show you, here's this little tiny sketch that I did for one of the scenes. This was a thumbnail. It's 1 inch by 1/2 inch. And of course, you can't tell what it is because with these initial thumbnails I create, they're just for my eyes only. So I'm going to describe what it is you're seeing here. Let me blow it up a little bit more. This little sketch is for a portion of the text where Leo Fender is a young teenager and he has a radio repair shop in his bedroom. And here's the initial sketch that I had. This figure right here, this is Leo stooped over his desk and he's repairing all of these radios. This vertical line here is the representation of the gutter. This is the spread, the red perimeter outline you see here. And these two little shapes here, these are the heads of his father and his mother looking in at him at his desk, working away, repairing radios. And this is back in the mid to late 1920s. Oh, here it is, 1924. I wrote that right into the doodle. And then from that stage, I'm then doing these very rough, kind of like storyboard sketches. Here's one here, sort of the next progress, where I'm thinking about this visual image of Leo at his desk in his bedroom, tinkering and working on radios. A little puff of smoke coming up because he's soldering something on a radio. And you can see how rough this is. Here's Leo in his glasses with his curly hair. And so I'm beginning to work out the character study and further pushing that idea. Am I really going to create this illustration of Leo working at his desk for that portion of the text? And here's another sketch version. Oops. This is going back to the same angle and composition that I had originally conceived of in that very initial rough thumbnail sketch of his parents. Let me get my cursor back here, of his parents looking into his bedroom and watching him at his desk. And these are, aesthetically, these are horrible little sketches. I don't show them to anyone. This is all preliminary work where I'm making the decisions as to what I'm going to do for the sketch. The editor and art director and design team at the publishing house never see these early sketches. So from this, I've decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. His parents looking in. And so then I create another, a little slightly more formal storyboard sketch. This one just happens to be in blue pencil. There's no significance to that. Blow this up a little bit for you. So you can see that in this next storyboard stage version, I've started to refine the composition a little bit. I'm working out where these red horizontal lines, I'm beginning to work out where I think the text, the paragraph of text for that spread is going to go. And here's Leo with his wavy hair and glasses, and I have a lamp, and there's some old 1920s radios here that I had to research, and here's his parents looking in the window. And then from this stage, I'm clearly making the definitive decision that this is what I'm going to create for the text for this spread. I'm committed now to this imagery, this scene of Leo in his bedroom. Sorry for all this jockeying around here of the image. So here we go. I've worked it out more. This vertical line, get my cursor back here. This vertical line, you can see that's the gutter. So I'm making sure that nothing important is going to be in the gutter. Here's these 1920s radios all stacked around in his room that he's working on. He has a magnifying glass and a glass of milk. And I had to research all of these parts and tubes. So here's the more refined storyboard sketch. And once I reach this stage, I will then take this sketch you see here, and I will scan it, and I will blow it up in Photoshop to the full size of the actual dimensions that the book is going to be printed at. And let's bring that sketch up now. So here's this version. I've brought it into Photoshop. And I've further refined it and cleaned it up a little bit. Whoops. And over here on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see my working layers, like this layer that's selected here already. That's just the color. I had created the sketch in black and white, but then for presentation purposes, I just threw in just a little bit of color to bring focus to this area of the composition. And this is the final sketch that I showed, along with all the other sketches encompassing the entire book. This is the final sketch, my presentation sketch, that I showed to the art director and editor and design team at the publishing house. And do I have, no, okay. I don't have the guide where the gutter is going to be, but I worked it out so that the gutter is approximately here. So the text is okay. It's well over here to the right. And even this pennant flag saying Fullerton, which is Fullerton, California, where Leo Fender went to high school. I have this well on this side of the gutter, so it's not going to be lost in the gutter. And I guess he played a little bit of saxophone, so I have the saxophone in here. And again, all these parts are researched. They actually do correspond to radios from that time period. Now, from at this point now, the sketches are approved, so I'll take this sketch and I'll put it on my light box, and that's what this next view is. Whoops, where did that go? Here it is. I'll just describe this a little bit. Okay. So you can kind of see the ghosting of the image underneath. That's the sketch on my light box, and then on top I've put my Arches paper, I believe is what I worked with for this book. And you can see over here on the left I have some reference photos of this bottom left one here. That's Leo when he was in high school, and this is Leo, I believe, college. And with a dark sepia crayon, it looks black here, but it was actually a dark sepia. Here's the crayon pencil here. I have the sketch underneath on the light box. Here's the good paper on top. And so I'm now drawing the final drawing. And as I draw on the fly, I'm making aesthetic corrections and refinements of the sketch that I'm seeing coming up from below. And I'm creating the final drawing. This is about mid-stage here. You can see I've just started working on Leo, the central figure here, and then all this background has not been completed yet, nor the radio. So once this drawing is completed, Let's see if I have another step here. So this is that sepia crayon drawing, the dark sepia crayon drawing that I was telling you about. And I've taken it off the light box. This is now on my drawing table. And you can see I've completed the drawing. His hat on the back of his chair, and I've completed all the components you can see inside of the peripheral elements here of the radios off to the side. And these pieces of paper tacked up on the wall behind Leo, I left them blank because I did a separate drawing of actual radio electronic schematics that were accurate to the day for radios in the 1920s. And then in Photoshop, in another layer, I added in here those electronic schematics. So now this drawing, this dark sepia crayon drawing that I've completed, that's my final drawing, and I scan that into Photoshop. And once it's in Photoshop, let me bring this up as large as I can here so you can see it. Whoops. So this is the final completed illustration, but I'm going to break down the layers for you so you can see how it was composed and created. This is the final drawing, the final completed illustration, but let me get rid of all of the parts here. These are over here on the right hand side of the screen. You can see I'm just clicking off all the layers that comprised this final illustration that I arranged and composed in Photoshop. So you can see here's that dark sepia crayon drawing that I just showed you previously that I created by drawing it on my light box with the sketch underneath. So here's the final drawing. You can see a little close up here. Here are all these schematics here that I did on a separate layer and then added into this drawing of Leo. So those are the schematics of the day, radio electronic schematics. Okay, so once I have this drawing in position, then I'll put in that probably was not next. This is not in the exact order, but there's a dark gray, a light gray block of color that I've put in the background behind the drawing, and then I later at some point erased out this portion. This will be the light where the door is open. And then I added blue on top of that. And you can see over where my cursor is, there's a texture there. This texture is created by, I had created with colored pencil and gouache, I created a full sheet of this texture, and I scanned the texture into Photoshop, and I brought it in as one of these background layers, and then I faded it. All this area here where you see the texture fades away, I faded it. Let's see, what is this layer? Okay, there's a wallpaper on the background behind Leo, so I created those stripes. And I added in, you can see it pop in and out. I'm clicking it on and off. There's some more of this texture, that sheet of gouache texture I had painted. I added in as another layer because I wanted a bit of a rough texture here for graphic interest. I didn't want all the colors to be totally flat. And then I start bringing in more color. Oh, no, I didn't do that next. Okay, let's see. Stuff. This layer is called stuff. Okay, that's the more boxes of things in his room. That's one of a separate sepia drawing that I did, and I brought that in and composed it in the bottom left corner as per my final presentation sketch that this whole drawing is based on. There's the pennant. Where are his parents here? Here are his parents. You can see I brought them in. Or well, there's one of them anywhere. That's just the dad. But there's the whole doorway in the background. And what am I missing here? Oh, this must be the mom. There's the mom. And of course, these were based on photographs that I found of his parents. And under white. This layer next I'm going to click on is called under white. And there, okay. It's an under white layer. It's so that everything in the foreground is going to pop. I created white underneath all of these foreground elements, Leo and the radios and the stack of books in his chair and the schematics on the wall behind him. And then there's just a series of color layers where I'm painting this layer of color in Photoshop with various brush tools so that it has a bit of a kind of a watercolor edge and look to it. And I'm just going to keep clicking on these color layers. Here's another layer of color. It's starting to define the shape and bringing some dark shading, color and dark shading to start defining the shapes of the objects. Let's see what next here. Well, this is very subtle, kind of shadows of color. And here's some deeper shadows. So you can see it in his hair and in the bottom left where the radios and saxophone are. Again, these are all created with different various Photoshop brushes. And then finally a top color on the top. It's let me see what that does here. Oh, it's just bringing in, that layer is bringing in the highlight of the steam coming off, or the smoke coming off his soldering iron and in his cheeks. I did the Fullerton pennant lettering last. There. Okay, so that is the completed illustration. So I've kind of brought you through from the initial thumbnail sketch from way, way back. Let's see if I can bring that up. Where is that? There it is, right there. This was the initial thought that I had, as crude as it was. Even though it's crude looking, in my mind, I'm envisioning the final illustration. But this is kind of just like a thumbnail reminder of the thought, so I won't forget about it when I'm initially reading the manuscript. There's Leo hunched over his desk, and there's his parents in the doorway. And you can see that's how it came out. The parents in the doorway. Oh, it's missing some color. Wait a minute. I thought there was more color. The door, of course. What else? Well, I guess that was just the only layer I forgot to add back in. So here's the final illustration. So now I hope you have a pretty good overview of how I create my illustrations. And in this case, it is particularly for a nonfiction story. Okay, thank you very much for being patient and listening to me ramble on. Again, if you want to see more about my illustration career and my illustrations for picture books, please go to stevensalerno.com. Okay, thank you.